As already said, I'm going to present my paper, which is based on my master thesis, which has the title Growth Regimes of Populist Governments, a Comparative Study on Hungary and Poland. And I decided to go for Hungary and Poland because I think regarding the rise of populism, these are two very interesting cases, as there the right-wing populist parties are actually in government, and that's for quite a while now. And regarding this, my main research question was what is the relationship between the demand and growth regime development and the establishment of the right-wing populist regimes in Poland and Hungary. To answer this question, I have further sub-questions, which were how have the demand and growth regimes in Hungary and Poland developed since the collapse of the Soviet Union? What economic policy measures did the right-wing populist parties then introduced after they came into power? And what is the impact of socioeconomic environment on possible changes in regard to the concept of social blocks? I need to put this away. Okay. So to answer this question, I proceed as you can see here more or less in my table of content, and this is also more or less the structure of my presentation, of course a bit smaller. Regarding my methodology and the theoretical framework, I used a hybrid approach with the purpose to trace the relationship between the economic and political developments in Hungary and Poland, especially after the global financial crisis, similar to what you just saw in the work of Umit and Benjamin. The post-Keynesian approach of demand and growth regimes and the macroeconomic policy regime analysis aim to show the changes in the demand and growth regimes, as well as the impact of the economic policies on that. I'm not going into deep in the growth regimes theory as you just saw them basically. The macroeconomic policy regime analysis is based on a standardized set of indicators of monetary, fiscal, and wage policy, as well as open economy, economic openness, but you will see it later on. The comparative political economy perspective has a purpose to examine in more detail the socioeconomic environment and its influence on the political and economic developments. And for this purpose, I draw on the concept of social blocks and the Polanyian approach of counter movements. So now I come to my results I have so far, and I start with the presentation of the growth regimes from Hungary and Poland. I laid the focus on the periods of 2000 to 2008 and 2009 to 2019, but I start with my explanation a bit earlier, before 2000. I mean, Umit already told you a bit about it. So the two countries liberalized, obviously, their economies after the end of the Soviet Union and implemented a series of neoliberal reforms. The goal was, of course, to successfully integrate into the Western capitalist system and to become competitive. And they introduced a neoliberal shock therapy to implement as many reforms as possible, as fast as possible. And in this process, particularly important were in the beginning, the institutions of the Washington Consensus, because they gave the countries a lot of FDI to finance the transformation process. And later on, it was the European Union who was a big motivation as well. But in this transformation phase and the need for capital, there was a competition in the former Eastern Bloc countries who for this FDI, so that they implemented more and more neoliberal reforms, which were sometimes also very avant-garde and extreme, and even not wanted by the institutions of the Washington Consensus, for example. However, in the end, the countries more or less successfully integrated or had this transformation because they had really high GDP growth in the first period. And But this came to the price that they were also very dependent on FDI and also on imports, especially of technologies. So together with the low productivity and the low competitiveness of the domestic labor force after socialism, this resulted in very deep current account deficits and domestic demand being the most important growth contributor before the global financial crisis. I classified both countries as domestic demand-led regime. However, I know that the categorization of Hungary is not quite straightforward because there is also the negative financial balances of the private sector. But yeah, I went for domestic demand-led because the negative financial balances of the public sector are far more deeper, suggesting that they played a more important role regarding investment and consumption. And in addition, I also looked at the household debt to GDP ratios of both countries, and they were also very, very low, so that I went for domestic demand-led. But yeah, it's also possible to classify Hungary probably different. Yeah, so then the global financial crisis happened, and this was kind of a turning point for both countries. Even if the crisis, of course, started not in these countries, the crisis spilled over very fast through the sudden stop of capital inflows. So that a lot of people were very upset with the former dependent growth model. And that led to the emergence of new political and economic ideas, and the two right-wing populist parties, Fidesz in Hungary and PIS in Poland, benefited from this disappointment and disillusionment of the voters after the crisis and were able to convince them with their new visions of political, social, and economic orders in the countries. Yeah, I start now with Hungary and Fidesz, who is in power since 2010 in the country, and will briefly summarize some of the policies they implemented and the results of my macroeconomic policy regime analysis. I start with monetary policy. I know that's not exactly the field of Fidesz, but actually the party is quite close, I would say, to the National Bank of Hungary, because the director of the National Bank used to be the finance minister until 2013. So there are still some connections, I would say. Monetary policy in general changed from the period of 2000 to 2008 to 2009, 2019, from expansionary to contractionary in general. But since 2013, Hungary is following a more looser monetary policy, aiming at stimulating the economy and promoting lending. And they also lowered the key interest rate again from 7% to 1%. So they probably will be more expansionary again, or that's at least the direction. Regarding the fiscal policy, Hungary was in 2000 to 2008 predominantly pro-cyclically. From 2009, it was more counter-cyclical, except in the year 2018 and 2019. However, the high public investment ratio remains the same, and overall it was always quite expansionary. The aim of the new of the government of Fidesz is mainly to stimulate the economy and to follow this renationalization strategy they have, especially in strategically important sectors as finance and energy and something like this. And they also truly want to support the domestic capitalists. So it's very expansionary, but they also had this gradual consolidation of the state budget as well through the reorganization of the state of the tax system and the reform of the pension system. Regarding the wage policy, it changed from slightly expansionary to contractionary. There was a lot of deregulation going on in the labor market. Also, the right to strike was, for example, limited, and I mean, there was also some tax benefits introduced for working families, and the minimum wage was increased, but in the end, there was a significant decline in the labor income share. And regarding the open economy, there was a small depreciation of the own currency, supporting the export sector, and also the export sector itself was supported by the government. So there we have a price and a non-price competition improved in the end. Then regarding Poland, It looks a bit different because in Poland there were actually not so many changes going on as in Hungary, for example. Monetary policy stayed expansionary. It's still very orthodox and conservative, with a key interest rate remained at 1.5%. Also, wage policy stayed in both periods contractionary, with declining income shares of the labor force. The fiscal policy is also still expansionary. It has the same or a similar aim as in Hungary. There's also this repolonization strategy, and also they what was very popular was this child benefit program, which was implemented after 2015 and was also a very important part of the election campaign of PIS. And regarding the open economy, there was the real depreciation of the own currency and also support of the domestic capitalists, especially in the export sector. And there was also a special development plan for the export sector in Poland, so that, yeah, the international competitiveness was improved. So coming back to my growth regimes, so as you could just see, because of the global financial crisis and the changed political changed political situation, a lot of things changed in both countries regarding the politics. And you can also see this in the changes in the growth regimes. In both countries, the financial balance sheets of the countries changed. Poland was able to reduce its current account deficit, actually, while Hungary even turned its deep deficit into surplus. Additionally, both countries decreased the deficits of their public sectors, and the private sectors went from a deficit to a surplus. Yeah, so in general, as I just said, the export sectors were really supported. So exports in general got more and more important. And but there we have a little difference, because in Hungary, it was really, although the changes were much more stronger than in Poland, I would say. Hungary moved to export-led mercantilist with rising labor market flexibility, welfare retrenchment, and the support of the export sector and improved international competitiveness, what led to the exports being much more important for growth than, for example, private consumption. In Poland, as I said, the export got also more important. So we have now weekly export-led regime. But in general, also private consumption is still very important. And we had, for example, also a declining inequality. Now I come to the comparative political economy part of my paper, because after this analysis, I also wanted to look at the reasons for these changes, like the deeper reasons. And the rise of the wide-wing populist governments in Hungary and Poland can be seen as, or are seen as, Polanian counter-movements against this extreme neoliberalism before the global financial crisis, because Polanyi saw the rise of fascism after the First World War as a counter-movement against the destructive effects of the economy on the society. So on these market tensions in this time, and now that you can see the parallel today, so that after the global financial crisis, the rise of populism can be seen as the Polanian counter-movement. So in this counter-movement, the domestic capitalists and bankers in the countries had an important impact on the development of new policy directions. In Hungary, the domestic capitalists felt threatened by the globalization, the international competition, and the economic policies of the former left government, so that they try to influence politics to a change in the strategy. And they did that, for example, through the Hungarian Chamber of Commerce, who played an important role in the development of Fidesz's new economic strategy after the global financial crisis. And in Poland, it was especially the bankers who were frustrated with the loss of influence and independence through the global financial crisis, so that they started to influence the politics for a greater state control, especially in the finance sector, and a more development-oriented strategy for the Polish economy. Just important to know that PIS, so the right-wing populists in Poland, are only in government since 2015. And you can already see that this development or this change started right after the global financial crisis, which is because the counter movement started after the crisis, and the Polish bankers or the social bloc started with this new direction already, with trying to influence the PO in a new direction. So this already started earlier. Yeah, so I come already more or less to the end, because in the end, both countries are at the moment in a kind of transition phase, with the two right-wing populist parties developing a new type of neoliberalism, more or less. Fidesz or Hungary has a stronger focus on economic nationalism, because I mean, they have a different rhetoric. They told the voters that they want to break with the old neoliberal system, but actually, when you look at the tax system or some labor market regulation, it's still very, very neoliberal. So that it's called kind of a disguised neoliberalism, while in Poland, they also have this economic nationalism in regarding the repolonization strategy, but they also have a bigger focus on this development-oriented strategy, and they are actually moving towards a more post-neoliberal system. Yes, so that's from me so far.